The wind didn't howl. It groaned, low and tired, like the earth itself ached beneath the weight of endless white. Snow blanketed everything. Trees, rocks, even the trail that used to wind its way up the mountain had vanished beneath feet of silence. Clara May stumbled, her breath shallow, jagged. Each inhale sliced at her throat like broken glass. Her boots, soaked through hours ago, now felt like blocks of ice strapped to her legs. The edges of her vision shimmered, whether from exhaustion or the cold. She couldn't tell anymore. She'd lost the trail 2 ridges back. The map, torn at the edges and damp from sleet, was crumpled in her coat pocket, useless now. She hadn't expected the storm to roll in so fast, hadn't expected the road to end without warning. But most of all, she hadn't expected to still be alive. The mountain didn't care about expectations. The mountain wanted her gone. A sharp gust knocked her sideways, and she crashed into the snowbank, gasping. For a moment, she lay there, cheek pressed into the freezing crust, heart hammering, too tired to cry. Her thoughts wandered. Maybe this was how it would end. Quiet, frozen, forgotten. Then she saw it. A flicker of light, small, steady, cut through the white blur. It blinked once, twice, like a fire's breath behind a frosted window. Clara's body moved before her mind caught up. She pushed herself upright, legs trembling, hands burning with cold. She staggered forward, boots crunching against the snow like distant gunfire. Each step was a battle. Her vision narrowed. The light grew closer. A cabin, weather-beaten, half swallowed by the forest, but real. Smoke curled from the chimney, barely visible against the slate sky. A narrow trail of footprints, faint but fresh, led to the porch. She collapsed against the door, arm shaking, as she knocked once. Then twice. Then harder. For a moment, nothing. Then the door creaked open, just enough to reveal a shadowed figure, tall and broad, with snow melting in his beard. He didn't speak. His eyes, dark and unreadable, moved from Clara to the storm behind her, and back again. Clara's lips parted, but only a hoarse rasp came out. "Please." The man stepped aside. Inside was warmth, fire, shelter, and silence thick as wool. She fell to her knees just past the threshold, snow melting from her coat and hair in slow rivulets. The door shut behind her with a final thud, and for the first time in days, Clara breathed without tasting death in the air. The man didn't ask questions. He set a chair near the hearth, placed a quilt over her shoulders, and handed her a tin cup filled with something hot and bitter. She drank without thinking, heat blooming in her chest like a slow sunrise. "You came through the East Trail." His voice was gravel, worn and cold. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice yet. "Storm's got another day in it, maybe more." He stirred the fire with a poker. "You'll stay here. No one gets through that pass tonight." She looked up at him. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave no reply, only watched the flames, his face carved from shadow and flickering orange light. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was something else. Measured, as if the mountain demanded reverence even indoors. She studied him quietly. His coat was stitched from old fur, worn at the elbows. His boots caked with snow. A rifle leaned against the doorframe, and above it, a carved symbol, a crescent moon over twin trees, hung like a forgotten talisman. "Clara," she said suddenly. "My name's Clara May." The man didn't turn. "Silas." Just one word. No more. Like that was all the past he was willing to share. Clara's body sank deeper into the chair, heat and fatigue making her limbs heavy. She watched the fire until the world blurred at the edges. Her last thought before sleep was simple. She'd made it. But why did it feel like this place had been waiting for her all along? Clara woke to the sound of crackling wood and the faint creak of boots on old floorboards. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the warmth, the scent of pine smoke, and the quiet hush of the cabin brought it all rushing back. She shifted beneath the quilt, stiff, sore but alive. A small miracle. Across the room, Silas stood at the window, watching the snowfall like it might come alive, and walked toward him. The morning light was pale, barely strong enough to push through the storm clouds, and it painted everything inside in soft gray. "You slept hard," he said without turning. "I haven't slept at all since Tuesday," Clara replied, her voice still hoarse. Silas gave a small nod. "You're lucky you made it. If the wind had shifted, you might have walked off a ledge instead of finding my porch." Clara sat up slowly, the aches in her limbs reminding her just how close she'd come to not waking at all. I didn't even know there was a cabin up here. I was aiming for Hollow Bend. Silas snorted softly. Hollow Bend's a day's ride in good weather. 3 on foot through snow. You would have never made it. That thought hit hard. Clara looked into the fire, her fingers curling around the warm tin cup still on the table from the night before. Then thank you, she said again, meaning it more this time. Silas finally turned, his expression unreadable. He didn't respond with words, just returned to his quiet tasks, checking the woodpile, feeding the embers, straightening a pelt draped over the chair across from her. You live here alone? She asked. He paused. For a while now. Clara waited, hoping for more, but that was all he offered. She got the feeling he was a man who didn't waste syllables unless they were worth the breath. I'll be out of your hair as soon as the storm clears, she said, sensing the tension. I don't want to intrude. Silas shook his head. Ain't about want. It's about surviving. You go out there now, you won't make it 10 yards. His tone wasn't cruel, just honest. The way someone might describe a loaded rifle or a broken bridge. Clara looked down at her hands. They were healing, but rough and pink from frost. Then I guess I owe you more than just thanks. You don't owe me anything, Silas said, pouring water into a kettle. Not yet. The day passed slow, like the storm outside, relentless, thick. Clara offered to help where she could. She peeled potatoes, swept out snow tracked in by boots, even fed the mules stabled in a shed out back. The animal, a shaggy old beast named Harlan, seemed unimpressed by her presence. Silas mostly kept to himself. He worked with quiet precision, repairing a trap mechanism near the hearth, fletching arrows with goose feathers, sharpening a knife with slow, rhythmic strokes. He didn't ask questions, and Clara didn't volunteer stories. But silence, when shared long enough, has a way of becoming something like comfort. That evening, as the fire roared and the wind battered the walls, Silas finally asked, "What were you running from?" Clara blinked, caught off guard. "What makes you think I was running?" He raised an eyebrow. People don't climb mountains in a snowstorm unless something's chasing them, or something worse is waiting behind. She hesitated. Then, there's a man in Hollow Bend. A sheriff with a badge and no soul. I saw something I shouldn't have. I had to leave. Silas studied her a long moment, then gave a single nod. Then you made the right choice. That's simple. Simple don't mean easy. She gave a soft laugh, bitter and warm at the same time. You've done some running yourself, haven't you? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for a small wooden box on a shelf. Inside was a faded photo, its corners curled, 3 faces, 1 man, 1 woman, 1 child. They all wore that same smile people used when they still believed things could be fixed. Silas stared at it a moment, then closed the box. Clara didn't press. She didn't need to. Pain like that didn't require explanation. It just needed room to breathe. That night, they ate in silence. Stew, strong coffee, and the kind of stillness that wrapped around 2 people like a shared blanket. Outside, the wind shrieked and screamed. But inside, the storm softened. And Clara, for the first time in weeks, felt something stir inside her that wasn't fear. It was small, but it was there. Hope. By the 3rd day, the wind had carved canyons through the snowbanks, sculpting them into frozen waves outside the cabin. Trees moaned beneath the weight, their branches draped in white like mourning veils. The sun hadn't shown its face in 60 hours, and the storm showed no sign of breaking. Clara stood at the window, her fingers pressed lightly against the frosted glass. Beyond it, the world was a blur of gray and white, and the occasional black silhouette of wind-torn pines. Inside, the cabin had settled into a rhythm. Silas was already awake, crouched near the stove with a pan of skillet bread rising slow over the embers. Clara could smell it, yeast, wood smoke, a hint of something sweet. She was beginning to recognize that the man didn't speak unless words served a function. But she also noticed he made 2 cups of coffee each morning now. He hadn't that first day. "I've never seen snow like this," she said, not looking away from the window. Silas gave a grunt that could have meant agreement or simple acknowledgement. Clara turned to him. "You ever get snowed in this long?" "Worse," he said. "One year, I spent 8 days in the North Ridge cave with only a rabbit and half a flask of whiskey. Rabbit didn't last long. Whiskey lasted less." She smiled faintly. "You talk more when there's bread in the oven." Silas didn't smile back, but his eyes held a glint of something close. Later, Clara offered to help organize the tools hung across the back wall: hammers, augers, hide stretchers, even a broken pair of snowshoes. Silas handed her an old saddlebag and nodded toward the crate beneath the workbench. "Things that don't bite go in there," he said. "Good to know," she muttered, squatting to open the crate. Inside, beneath some bundled ropes and an old oilskin coat, she found something unexpected: a journal, its leather cover worn smooth, initials burned faintly into the corner: A.B. She hesitated, glancing toward Silas. "Was this yours?" she asked, holding it up. Silas didn't look over. "No. Someone important." His jaw tensed. "Used to be." Clara felt the weight of the words before they landed. She opened the journal carefully. The writing was neat, almost delicate. Names, dates, small drawings of plants, notes about snow patterns and animal migrations. But between the pages, a letter fell out, unfolded once, then again. She skimmed it quickly. "I'll wait for you on the ridge. If the thaw doesn't come, I'll light the signal fire. You said you'd come back. I'm still holding you to that, Silas." It was unsigned. Clara folded it slowly, placing it back where it had been. When she looked up, Silas was watching her. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to pry." Silas stared for a moment longer, then turned away, his shoulders slightly tighter than before. "Some things get buried in snow for a reason," he muttered. Clara didn't reply. She returned the journal to the crate and shut it gently. But she didn't forget the look on his face. That night, the storm cracked the sky with a sound like timber breaking in half. Clara bolted upright from sleep, the quilt tangled around her legs. Silas was already by the window, rifle in hand. "What was that?" she asked, voice thin. "Tree, probably. Or ice shift. Happens when the wind hits from the east." He didn't seem convinced. Clara moved beside him. Outside, the storm raged harder than ever. But in the distance, barely visible through the swirling white, there was a glow. Not lightning, not fire, but movement. "What is that?" she whispered. Silas squinted. "Light. Maybe torchlight." "Someone's out there?" He didn't answer. He just checked the chamber of his rifle, then turned toward the door. "Stay inside," he said. "Lock the door behind me." Clara grabbed his arm. "You can't just." "I've lived through worse," he said, voice cold as the wind. Then he stepped out into the blizzard. And Clara, heart pounding, locked the door behind him. She stood in the center of the room, listening. But the storm gave no answers. Only the whisper of snow against wood, like 1,000 voices praying too softly to be heard. The cold outside hit Silas like a slap. Even with his thick coat, wool scarf, and gloves worn soft from years of trap setting, the air cut deep. Snow whirled in thick, chaotic sheets, and the wind shoved at his chest like an angry god. But the light was still there. Faint, flickering. He moved cautiously, boots crunching over snow crust. Each step was a wager. Beneath the white, a root, a dip, a buried trap could wait. But Silas knew this land. He'd walked it for decades, even when no one else dared climb this far. He crested a small ridge where the trees thinned, and there, through a break in the squall, he saw it clearly. A lantern, hanging from a low branch, swaying in the wind. But no one was near it. Silas raised his rifle, eyes scanning the tree line. The wind moaned louder here, dragging his name through the branches like a ghost, Silas. He didn't spook easy. But tonight, something felt wrong. The lantern was old, rusted at the edges. He approached slowly and reached out, still warm to the touch. Freshly lit. He turned in a slow circle. "Who's there?" he barked, voice muffled by snow. No answer. But something moved to his left, too fast to track, too quiet for a bear, too light for a man. He lowered his rifle, heart pounding harder than it had in years. Then it hit him. This wasn't a trap. It was a message. Back at the cabin, Clara had tried reading one of the old books from Silas's shelf, a collection of Western folk songs with pages yellowed from smoke and time, but she couldn't focus. Every gust of wind made her flinch. Every creak in the rafters turned her head. She stoked the fire, then added a few drops of lamp oil to keep it blazing. Her eyes kept darting to the door. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 30. What if he didn't come back? Clara crossed the room and knelt at the window, brushing frost away to see the tree line. Nothing. Just white. And silence. She stood and paced, then finally sat down hard in the chair nearest the stove, burying her face in her hands. She had no way of knowing what lurked out there. Bandits? Wolves? Worse? Was she safer staying put, Or should she try to follow? She hated waiting. Always had. Then the door creaked. Her breath caught. The handle turned. And Silas stepped inside, covered in snow, face like carved granite. "You're hurt," she said, rising instantly. "No, but your face." He set the rifle down, shaking off snow like a dog after the river. "I'm fine. Just windburn." Clara saw the difference, though. His hands trembled slightly, and his eyes weren't cold, they were far away, like he hadn't fully returned yet. "What happened?" she asked. Silas didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the hearth, stood with his back to the fire, and unrolled a piece of parchment. Clara hadn't seen him carrying it. It looked old, faded, and drawn by hand. "What is that?" Silas stared at it for a long moment. Then, "Someone wants me to remember." He didn't explain more. Not that night. But Clara saw the weight in his shoulders. Whatever he'd found, whoever had placed that lantern out there, it hadn't just spooked him. It had stirred something. Later, when the fire dimmed and the storm eased to softness, Clara lay awake beneath her blanket, staring at the rafters. She could hear Silas's footsteps above. He was checking the roof integrity, or maybe just needed to move. Some people walked when they couldn't sleep. Others drank. Silas, she suspected, did both, at least in memory. When the steps stopped and all fell quiet, Clara finally let her own thoughts settle. She didn't know what she was still doing here. She should have left days ago. But something about this cabin, this man, the way the storm refused to let go, it all felt like a story she hadn't finished reading yet. And maybe, for once, she wanted to stay long enough to see how it ended. The next morning, the storm had eased, but it hadn't ended. Snow still fell, light, steady, but the wind had calmed, and with it came a silence that felt thicker than ever. Not peaceful. Not yet. Just waiting. Clara sat at the table, watching Silas prepare his gear. He hadn't spoken much since returning the night before. He moved with purpose, packing tools, strapping knives to his belt, checking his traps log, like a man going to war. "Going out again?" she asked quietly. Silas nodded. "Need to check the perimeter." That map wasn't just some old memory. It marked something. What kind of something? He paused. "An old trail," he said. "One I buried years ago." Clara frowned. "Buried?" "On purpose." He tightened the strap on his satchel. "Stay inside. If anything happens, lock the door. Don't open it unless I say your name." She stood. "Silas." He looked at her then. Really looked. His eyes weren't just wary. They were pleading. "Please." Clara didn't argue. She just nodded. Silas took the high trail first, climbing along the eastern ridge, where the snowpack was thinner and the trees less dense. The footprints were mostly erased now, but here and there he found a sign, something that didn't belong. A boot scuff. A broken twig snapped too cleanly. A patch of disturbed snow where someone had knelt. Whoever had lit that lantern wanted to be seen, but not found. And they knew where to leave breadcrumbs only he would recognize. He found the second marker near the split pine. An old trap, rusted and empty, placed upside down in the snow. That had been his signal once. Back when he and Asa Brigham ran the line together. The name caught in his chest like smoke. Asa, the boy with a laugh like thunder and a temper that burned hotter than a July forge. Silas hadn't spoken his name in years. And now someone was dragging him back to it. Meanwhile, Clara stayed busy. She swept the floors, boiled coffee, and read from the journal again, the one marked AB. She tried not to think of the letter folded inside, but its words haunted her. "You said you'd come back." Had Silas left someone behind? A wife? A brother? A partner? And why hadn't he told her? She heard the wind shift outside and glanced toward the door. Still no sign of him. Clara found herself pacing. Then she noticed a large wooden crate near the back wall. It had been nailed shut. Rough iron hinges, reinforced edges. Not a food chest. Not a gearbox. Something personal. Without thinking, she knelt and traced her fingers across the lid. Carved into the wood, faint but still legible, was a name. Brigham. Her pulse quickened. A coincidence. Or, before she could decide whether to open it, the door slammed open. Clara leapt to her feet as Silas stumbled inside, face pale, breath ragged. "Help me," he said through gritted teeth. She rushed forward and caught his arm. Blood dripped from his glove. Not a deep wound, but fresh. What happened? He dropped his gear on the floor and winced as she helped him to the chair near the fire. "Someone's out there," he muttered, "and they're not lost." She grabbed a cloth and pressed it to the cut. Bandits. Silas shook his head. No, this is personal. Clara stilled. Someone from before. He looked up at her, jaw tight. His name's Levi Brigham, Ace's younger brother. Clara's eyes widened. The journal. Silas nodded slowly. I left them behind. Years ago. They warned me not to walk away from a line. I did anyway. Took a rifle, 2 mules, and a heart full of shame. He grimaced. I thought they died in the snows that followed. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she tied off the cloth. And now he's back, and he's leaving signs for me. That night, as the wind picked up again and firelight flickered against the log walls, Clara sat across from Silas. You go and talk to him, she asked. Silas stared into the flames. I think he wants me to follow. And will you? I don't know. Clara leaned forward. You spent years hiding from the past, but maybe it didn't want revenge. Maybe it just wanted to be seen. He looked at her then, really looked. You think I deserve peace? She didn't blink. I think you deserve truth, and truth never comes when we hide. Outside, snow began to fall harder again, but inside something shifted, quiet as a thaw beneath the surface. Maybe they weren't just surviving anymore. Maybe they were beginning to live. The morning came wrapped in silence. Not the peaceful kind. The heavy, expectant kind, like the whole mountain was holding its breath. Silas moved with slow deliberation, buckling his rifle strap, filling a small pouch with dried meat, striking a flint for his travel lantern. The wound on his hand was bandaged but still tender, and his eyes looked older than the night before. Clara stood by the hearth, arms crossed, watching. You're going after him, she said quietly. Silas didn't answer right away. Just cinched the last strap on his pack and turned to face her. He left another sign. North Bend Trail. I won't be gone long. Clara's jaw tightened. You don't even know if he means peace. I don't know if he means murder either. But I can't keep hiding from this. She stepped forward. Let me come with you. Silas shook his head. Too dangerous. If he's half the man Asa was, he's better with a blade than I am with a gun. Then all the more reason. He cut her off with a look, firm, not cruel. This is between me and the ghosts I left behind. She watched him go from the porch, his figure fading between the pines, each step swallowed by snow. The wind had calmed, but the cold remained sharp, biting at exposed skin. She didn't go back inside until he disappeared over the ridge. Then the quiet returned. And she hated it. Inside the cabin, Clara tried to distract herself. She sorted beans, cleaned the lanterns, chopped more wood for the fire even though there was already plenty stacked. But her mind kept slipping back to the image of Silas walking into the woods alone. Was it guilt that drove him? Or penance? She returned to the wooden crate, the one with the name Brigham carved faintly into the lid. This time, she didn't hesitate. She pried it open. Inside, bundles of letters, wrapped in leather cord, a pair of child's boots, worn and stitched with care, a flintlock revolver, long cleaned but clearly unused in years. And at the bottom, a carved wooden token in the shape of a crescent moon over 2 trees. The same symbol hung over the cabin door. Clara turned it over in her hand. On the back, the initials AB. Asa Brigham. Meanwhile, Silas followed the northern ridge trail, the lantern at his side, swaying with each step. The woods here were different, older, darker. Snow clung to every surface like secrets waiting to melt. Half a mile in, he found it. Another lantern, this one hanging from the remains of a hunting blind. Beneath it, carved into a patch of bark, was a word. Debt. Silas exhaled slowly, cold vapor curling around his beard. He remembered this place. It was where Asa had once saved his life, from a cougar, from frostbite, from himself. It didn't matter. The debt had never been paid. Until now. Back at the cabin, Clara folded one of the letters. The ink was faded, but the message clear. Silas, I know why you left. I even forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't bury the bones. If you ever come back, don't come with apologies. Come with truth. The storm outside had started again, fine needles of ice tapping at the glass like impatient fingers. She stood and moved to the door. Waited. Watched. By the time Silas returned, the sky had turned steel gray. He stepped through the door, soaked, silent, face unreadable. Clara rushed to him. Are you hurt? He shook his head. No. Did you see him? Silas lowered his pack, then pulled something from inside, an old knife with a carved handle. He placed it on the table like a relic from another life. He was there, he said, but he didn't speak. Just left this. Clara reached for it gently. The blade was clean, the handle marked with the same moon and trees symbol. What does it mean? Silas looked into the fire, his voice a low whisper. It means I still have time. To do what? He turned to her slowly, to make things right. And as the fire cracked and the storm whispered against the walls, Clara realized something she hadn't dared believe before. Silas wasn't just trying to survive the mountain anymore. He was trying to survive himself. That night, the wind picked up again. It wasn't violent, just persistent, like a whisper that wouldn't fade. It slithered through the gaps in the logs, ruffled the flames in a hearth, and curled around Clara's spine as she stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of venison stew. Silas sat at the table, cleaning the knife Levi had left behind. Each stroke of the cloth seemed deliberate, meditative. You think he'll come again? Clara asked, not looking up. Silas paused. I hope so. Why? Because last time, he didn't come to kill me. And if a man makes the effort to leave a warning instead of a bullet, maybe he still wants a conversation. Clara turned toward him, her hands tightening around the ladle. You always speak like that. Like what? Like everything is already half lost. Silas looked up, because most things are. They ate in silence. Clara wasn't hungry, but she forced herself to eat. The warmth helped. The routine helped, but her thoughts wouldn't settle. She'd read the letters. She'd seen the name Asa Brigham scrawled again and again, words of longing, regret, unfinished forgiveness. She didn't know the full story yet, but she knew enough to feel the gravity of it. And yet, her own story, she'd never spoken aloud. Not once since she left Hollow Bend. Not even to herself. Silas finished his meal, pushed the bowl aside, and leaned back in the chair. When did you leave? He asked, voice low. Clara blinked. Hollow Bend. He nodded. She hesitated. Then, 14 days ago. What happened? She stared into the fire. He called it justice. Sheriff Dane. Said what he did to that boy was legal. Said the badge gave him the right. Her voice grew tight, quiet. But that boy was barely 15. And he didn't even have a weapon. Silas said nothing. I spoke up. Said what he did was murder. Next morning, my store was burned. My horse was poisoned. My name became a curse. Her jaw clenched. So I left, took the winter pass, and prayed the mountain would be kinder than the law. Silas nodded slowly. It was. She smiled bitterly. Not by much. Silas leaned forward, elbows on knees. I buried my brother on this mountain, he said. He wasn't blood, but closer than any kin I ever had. We built traps together, fought wolves, got drunk in the cold, and swore we'd die old and toothless in rocking chairs. He paused. Then I left. Took a job down south, thought I needed something more than trees and silence. But Asa stayed. And the storm that came that year, it didn't leave much behind. He ran a hand through his beard. I didn't come back for 3 winters. By then, Levi was gone. Cabin empty. Graves unmarked. He looked at her. You asked why I speak like everything's half lost. That's why. Clara didn't know what to say. So she reached across the table and took his hand. For a long moment, neither spoke. But something passed between them, stronger than words, older than pain. Later, as Clara curled into the cot with a blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders, Silas lingered near the fire. He stared at the knife, at the flames, at the carved token from the crate. When he finally spoke, it was barely a breath. I think he wants me to follow him deeper into the ridge. Clara, half asleep, murmured, Will you? I might not have a choice. Then, I'm coming with you. Silas turned. No. Clara's eyes opened fully. Her voice was clear. Yes. Outside, snow began again, soft and relentless. But inside the cabin, the silence was no longer cold. It was resolve. The next morning, they left before sunrise. The world was silent in that eerie pre-dawn way, when light is only a rumor and every sound feels louder than it should. Their breath hung in the air like ghosts as they trudged through the deep snow, lanterns swinging gently between them. Clara wore Silas's spare coat, too large at the shoulders but warm and thick, and the fur-lined boots he'd restitched by hand 2 winters ago. Her pack was light. Food, water, extra flint, and the revolver from the Brigham chest. Silas carried the rest. I thought you didn't want me to come, she said as they reached the ridge's first incline. I don't, he replied flatly. Then why let me? He looked at her, his eyes narrow in the cold. Because you're going to follow me either way. Might as well keep you in sight. Clara gave a half smile. That's the nicest thing you've said all week. The trail narrowed as they ascended, flanked on both sides by tall pines that swayed in the wind like watchers. Snow clung to their branches, occasionally dropping in soft, muffled thuds. A hawk circled once above them, then vanished into the clouds. Silas stopped at a broken fence, half buried under snowdrifts, and traced a pattern carved into the wood. Brigham trail marker, he murmured. They're leading us. Clara frowned. What if it's a trap? It probably is. She hesitated. And you're still going. Silas didn't look at her. I have debts older than your fear. They pressed on. Midday brought a break in the clouds. Pale light spilled through the branches and lit the snow with a strange, ghostly glow. Clara caught herself staring at Silas as he walked ahead, the way he scanned the woods, the way his shoulders squared every time a bird rustled or a twig snapped. He didn't walk like a man going to his death. He walked like a man hoping not to. By late afternoon, they reached a clearing, a wide, snow-covered basin surrounded by steep cliffs. In its center stood a stone circle, 7 rocks arranged in a half-moon, each marked with a different symbol. Silas froze. I know this place. Clara stepped beside him, breath catching in the cold. What is it? A promise. Broken. He walked slowly to the center of the circle and knelt, brushing snow from one of the stones. Beneath the ice, the carving of a handprint and 3 arrows was still visible. Asa, Levi, and me, he said softly. This is where we swore never to leave each other behind. Clara lowered herself beside him. And then you did. He nodded. I thought I was doing the right thing. Saving them from me. I was wrong. Suddenly a sound. A whistle, long, low, human. From the tree lean. Clara's hand shot to the revolver in her coat. Silas stood, scanning the trees. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. Tall, wrapped in dark wool and fur, face partially covered by a scarf. But the eyes were clear. Steady, blue as glacier ice. Silas exhaled. Levi. The man stopped a few paces away, holding no weapon, just a walking stick carved with Brigham symbols. Didn't think you'd come, he said. Silas took a cautious step forward. Didn't think you'd be alive. Levi chuckled, dry and sharp. Plenty of things don't die when they should. Silas flinched at that, but didn't reply. Clara watched in silence, tension like iron in her muscles. Then Levi's eyes shifted to her. You brought a shadow. She's not a shadow, Silas said firmly. Levi studied her for a moment, then gave the slightest nod. I suppose none of us are what we were anymore. The 3 stood in silence. The snow fell gently now. Around them, the old oath circle stood frozen in time, a memory-turned battleground. And beneath the stillness, Clara felt it. Something coming. Not rage, not vengeance, but reckoning. Silas stepped forward. Each movement was cautious, as if the snow beneath his boots might shatter into the past. Clara stood at the edge of the circle, her hand still resting on the revolver inside her coat, eyes fixed on the 2 men who once called each other brother. Levi's face didn't shift. He looked like a man carved from mountain itself, weathered, cold, and unmoving. You remember what you said the last time we stood here? Levi asked, voice cutting through the hush. Silas nodded. I said I'd return. And you didn't. I was a coward. Levi flinched, but only slightly. He dropped his gaze for a breath, then looked up again, jaw tight. You left Asa to die. Silas didn't argue. I did. Clara felt something twist in her chest at the admission. Silas didn't speak it like a confession. He spoke it like a sentence. I left because I thought he'd be safer without me, Silas continued. I'd been drinking too much, fighting too much. I didn't want to drag him down. Levi's eyes flared. And yet when the snow came, he climbed to the ridge looking for you. Thought maybe you'd gotten stuck on a trap line. He died in that storm, Silas. Silas looked away. I know. He died calling your name. Silence fell again. Even the wind held its breath. Clara finally stepped forward, unable to stay at the edges any longer. She looked at Levi. He came back. Maybe not in time. Maybe too late. But he came. Levi turned to her, his expression unreadable. And who are you to speak for him? I'm someone who nearly died on this mountain, she said. Someone who knows what it's like to be abandoned by people who promise to stand beside you. And I know what it means when a man chooses to turn around instead of run. Levi studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat. Clara tensed, but he only pulled out a small bundle wrapped in canvas. He handed it to Silas. Inside, a worn leather-bound journal. The same one Clara had seen pages of in the crate back at the cabin. Aces, Levi said. I found it after the thaw. Thought you ought to carry what he left behind. Silas took it with shaking hands. He didn't open it. He didn't speak. But the tremor in his fingers said more than words ever could. The sun dipped behind the ridge, casting the clearing into long shadows. Snow sparkled like ash in the fading light. Levi turned. There's a place north of here. The old logging camp. I stay there in winter. If you want to talk again, I'll be there till thaw. Silas nodded. I might come. Levi paused, then gave a quiet reply. I hope you do. Then he disappeared into the trees, snow swallowing his steps like he'd never been there. That night, back at the cabin, Clara sat by the fire, while Silas turned the journal over in his hands. He wrote every day, he said quietly, even when the snow sealed them in. Clara reached out, touching his forearm. You're carrying him now. Silas nodded. Not as a burden, he said. As a promise. Outside, the wind had calmed, and for the first time since she arrived in Dust Creek, Clara believed spring might actually come. The next morning came with birdsong. Not many, just 1 or 2 larks darting between pine branches, but enough to feel like the mountain was waking up. Clara stood by the water barrel outside, scooping the first clean meltwater into a tin cup. The cold bit at her knuckles, but she welcomed it. After months of frostbite and bone-deep chill, this kind of cold felt alive. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. Levi stepped out. His coat was lighter now, his movements more relaxed. He looked less like a shadow of the past and more like a man who'd finally laid something down. Mornin', he said, voice still a little rough. Clara handed him the second cup. Still can't believe you're real. Levi smiled faintly. Neither can I sometimes. Inside, Silas was poring over Ace's journal again. The pages had become a ritual, one entry each morning, read aloud sometimes, sometimes not. It no longer stung the way it did the first time. Now it felt like lighting a candle rather than poking an open wound. Clara came in first, brushing snow melt from her boots. He's staying, she said simply. Silas didn't look up. I figured. She sat across from him. You okay with that? Silas nodded. Not sure what okay feels like, but I don't want him gone. Levi entered a few minutes later, ducking slightly under the low threshold. He looked around the cabin like it was a museum of his own grief. Then finally, he stepped to the table and placed something between them all. A folded map. Hand-drawn. Ink faded, but still legible. What's this? Silas asked. The old ridge line, before the logging camps collapsed. Silas raised an eyebrow. Why now? Levi pointed to a section marked in red. There's a hot spring tucked into the North Fork. Asa marked it years ago. Always talked about rebuilding a proper post there. Supply cabin. Smokehouse. Maybe even a trading station. Clara leaned in. And you want to build it now. Levi looked between them. Maybe it's time we stop carrying the dead. Start planting something for the living. Silas stared at the map. The idea of building something again, it wasn't foreign. But it had always seemed like a dream someone else had, someone younger, someone less bruised. Now, maybe it was time. The days that followed were filled with movement. The 3 of them cleared snow from the shed roof, repaired the fence around the back paddock, res-tack logs, and reopened the long-forgotten path toward the North Fork. They worked side by side, and with each tool passed, each joke shared, the silence between them grew lighter. One morning, Clara brought out the revolver from the Brigham chest and placed it on the table. I don't want to carry this anymore, she said. Silas nodded. Then don't. She wrapped it in leather and buried it beneath the hearthstones. Not to forget, but to begin. Levi began carving again. Figures, totems, trail markers. Small pieces of wood that took shape with each stroke of his knife. One evening, as the fire crackled and supper cooked low, he handed Clara a carving. It was rough but clear 2 pine trees, side by side with a crescent moon above. She ran her thumb across the grooves. This was your family mark, wasn't it? He nodded. She looked to Silas. It's ours now too, isn't it? Neither man spoke, but both nodded. The thaw came fast that week. Meltwater carved fresh veins through the valley. Trees uncurled their branches. The ridge trails reopened. Clara stood by the fire one night, watching Levi and Silas speak in low voices on the porch. They weren't brothers again, not like before. But they weren't strangers anymore either. She smiled to herself. Dust Creek had been a place she stumbled into to survive. Now it was something else entirely. A place she chose. A place she could stay. The path to the North Fork was still half frozen, but it was open. On the third day after Levi proposed the idea, they set out, Silas, Clara, and Levi, each carrying packs, tools, and memories too heavy to leave behind. They didn't speak much as they walked. The forest did the talking, cracking ice, whispering wind, and the occasional startled call of a returning jaybird. It was the farthest Clara had gone since her first arrival, and it felt like going home. The clearing opened up slowly, a basin nestled between two ridgelines surrounded by tall firs and hidden by a bend in the slope. At its center, a wide, shallow spring. Steam curled from its surface in tendrils, rising into the cool air like breath from the mountain itself. Clara stared, eyes wide. It's beautiful. Levi stepped forward and knelt beside the edge, touching the water. Warm, clean, year-round flow. Silas scanned the treeline. Good vantage points. Natural shelter from wind. This could work. Clara smiled. It's not just a good place to build. It's a good place to start. They spent the day scouting the area. Levi marked where a smokehouse could stand, where the stream could be redirected for a trough. Silas tested the ground for frost depth and old roots. Clara walked the perimeter, visualizing fencing, trails, even a garden. It wasn't a cabin anymore. It was a homestead. That night, they made camp at the spring's edge. Silas built the fire, Levi set the snares, and Clara cooked a stew of dried elk and root vegetables with the last of the winter spices. As the stars emerged, sharp and unblinking above the dark peaks, they sat in a loose circle, sharing warmth. Levi passed around a flask. To Asa, he said simply. They drank in silence, not as mourning, but as memory. Later, Clara sat a little apart from the others, watching the water shimmer in the firelight. Silas joined her quietly, kneeling on the grass, now softening with spring. You ever think you'd end up here? He asked. Clara shook her head. I used to think the only way I'd survive was by running. You stopped running. She looked at him, her eyes calm but bright. So did you. They didn't touch. Didn't need to. The closeness was enough. The next morning, Clara woke early. The fire was still smoldering. Silas and Levi were asleep, wrapped in thick blankets on either side of camp. She stood, stretched, and walked to the edge of the ridge. The view took her breath away. Mountains stretched in all directions, wrapped in mist. The valley below was waking. Bird song, trickling meltwater, the crack of branches in the distance. And then movement. Far off, along the southern trail, a figure on horseback. Alone, moving slow. Clara narrowed her eyes. Not a trader, not a hunter. She stepped back toward camp, heart beginning to race. Someone was coming, and the mountains, they weren't finished with her yet. Clara moved fast. She crossed the clearing in 3 long strides, boots silent on the damp earth. Her breath came in tight pulls, not from fear, but from something sharper, instinct. She reached the fire and knelt beside Silas, hand pressing his shoulder. He stirred. One eye opened, instantly alert. Rider, Clara whispered. South Trail. Alone. Levi sat up before Silas even moved. Weapon drawn. Didn't see one, but saddlebags were heavy. Silas stood, already buckling his belt. Could be a traitor. Could be worse. Levi checked the position of the sun, then the slope beyond the trees. 10 minutes out if he keeps pace. Silas grabbed his rifle. Let's greet him before he greets us. They took position at the bend where the old trail crossed the spring basin. Clara stayed behind a pine, revolver gripped but out of sight. Levi leaned casually against a fallen log. Silas stood in the open, calm, unarmed but unreadable. They waited. The hoofbeats came slow and steady. No rush, no stealth. Whoever it was didn't expect trouble or didn't care. Then the rider appeared. A man, middle-aged, tall, with sun-leathered skin and a thick coat lined in buffalo hide. His face was mostly obscured by a scarf, but his eyes, sharp, gray, calculating, scanned the 3 figures ahead with practiced calm. He pulled the horse to a halt. Well, he drawled. Didn't expect to find a welcome party out here. Silas said nothing. The man looked around. 3 of you. That's rare. Most folks don't travel in packs anymore. Clara stepped into view, quietly but deliberately. We're not travelers. Ah, the man said, voice soft with amusement. So you're building. He dismounted in a slow, easy motion. No sudden moves. No arrogance. But confidence radiated off him like heat off a stove. I go by Rainer, he said. And I trade. Salt, powder, coffee, news. Levi's eyes narrowed. We didn't send for any of those. No, Rainer said. But trouble don't always wait for an invitation. They brought him into camp after a tense silence. Clara insisted on searching his saddlebags, which he allowed with a polite shrug. Inside, dried goods, tobacco rolls, a deck of marked cards, and a sealed letter. She held it up. That's not addressed. Rainer smiled thinly. Don't need to be. I already know who it's for. He handed it to Silas without waiting for permission. Silas frowned, turning the envelope over. No name. No mark. Just a wax seal broken. He opened it and scanned the page. His face didn't change, but his fingers curled just slightly at the edge. Clara watched closely. What is it? Silas looked up, voice distant. The sheriff from Hollow Bend. Levi straightened, still breathing. More than that, Silas said. He's expanding, pushing up through the valley. Claims he's restoring order to the backcountry. Clara stepped forward, pulse kicking harder. Dane. Silas nodded slowly. He's coming. Rainer leaned against a tree. He's already sent riders this far. Surveyors, mostly, and a few hired guns. They're not here yet, but they're coming. One camp at a time. He met Clara's gaze. And if I'm not mistaken, you've given him a reason to come fast. Silas looked to her, silent but sharp. Clara didn't blink. I'm not running again. You might have to, Levi said. At least until we're ready. Silas shook his head. No, we built this. We bled for it. If he's coming, he'll find us standing. That night, the wind changed. It wasn't winter anymore, but the air still carried a bite. Clara sat alone by the fire after the others had turned in. Rainer had made camp a little ways off, claiming he preferred to sleep close to his horse. She didn't trust him, not fully. But part of her understood the kind of man he was. A man who survived by knowing where the cracks were and when to step over them. Silas came out quietly, draping a blanket over her shoulders. You all right? She nodded. I will be. They sat together in silence. The mountains loomed overhead. The stars burned cold. And somewhere far below, a lawman rode north with fire in his chest. By morning, the camp was different. The air still smelled of pine and damp earth, but tension had taken root, quiet as a creeping vine. Rainer sat sipping boiled coffee beside his horse, while Silas, Levi, and Clara studied the letter once more. No signature, no official seal, just words scratched in haste and arrogance. Dust Creek is unclaimed land no longer. We ride to bring law. All resistance will be treated accordingly. Silas folded it again, jaw tight. He's marking territory like a wolf. Levi glanced at the tree line. And wolves don't send warnings unless they're already close. They spent the next hours preparing. Levi reinforced the ridge trail with deadfall, logs stacked and hidden, ready to collapse across the path. Clara helped Silas move supplies from a spring to the cabin, setting aside dry goods, tools, ammunition. Every trip down the slope felt heavier than the one before. They weren't just stockpiling. They were bracing for siege. Rainer watched them work, occasionally offering advice, but mostly staying quiet. When Clara passed him near the creek, he raised an eyebrow. You planning to stay when they come? She didn't slow. Not planning to run. He nodded, tossing a pebble into the stream. Stubborn's good, but smart stays alive. She stopped. Why are you still here, Rainer? He looked up at her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Because sometimes it pays to know which side will still be standing when the dust clears. That night, around the fire, Clara finally broke the silence. We need a plan. Levi nodded. They'll come in groups. Scouts first, then riders. Probably make camp near the southern bluff. From there, they'll send someone to talk. Or to spy, Silas added. Clara looked between them. Can we hold them off? Silas didn't answer immediately. We can slow them. Make it clear this land isn't unclaimed. But if it turns to fire and bullets... He let the sentence hang. Levi leaned forward. We make them rethink. Hit their pride. Show them we're not some backwoods squatters. Clara narrowed her eyes. Then we don't wait for them to knock. We welcome them. The next day, they laid the first trap. South of the trailhead, Levi rigged a snare designed not to injure but to warn, a signal rope strung across a narrow pass that would trigger a fire arrow if disturbed. Clara prepared a series of false paths, twigs bent, boot prints dragged, old trail markers deliberately shifted. It wouldn't fool a seasoned scout for long, but might buy them a day. Silas mounted Harlan for the first time in weeks and rode to the ridge, watching for smoke, movement, the gleam of steel on saddles. When he returned at dusk, his face was grim. They're 2 days out, maybe less. That night, Levi shared something none of them expected. When Asa and I were boys, he said, we used to dig hideouts under tree roots. Little dens, big enough for two. Called them bone shelters. Clara looked over. Why? In case something came. In case we needed to disappear. He looked toward the forest, now older, wiser. I think we'll need one more. Silas stood, brushing soot from his hands. No, he said. We don't hide anymore. He looked at both of them, then to Raynor, who now listened from the shadows. This land's ours. Not by claim. Not by ink. By sweat. By firewood split in the dark. By graves we've dug and promises we've kept. He turned to Clara. We've run enough. Clara met his gaze and nodded. Then Levi. Then slowly even Raynor. Outside the cabin, the stars blinked cold and clear. And somewhere, just beyond the valley bend, hoofbeats echoed in the dark. Dawn broke slow and silver. The fog clung to the trees like old regret, and the world held its breath. Clara stood at the cabin window, watching the ridge. The others stirred behind her, quiet as ghosts. They had one more hour, maybe less. They wore no uniforms, these men from Hollow Bend. But their boots were polished, their horses well fed, and their eyes cold. There were 6 of them. The one in front held a paper with a crude seal and a list of names. He didn't dismount. This land now falls under jurisdiction of Sheriff Dane, he called out. Evacuation is required. Non-compliance will be met with force. Silas stepped forward. No, just one word. But it echoed down the valley like thunder. Rifles were raised. Then something unexpected happened. Raynor stepped out of the woods. He didn't carry a weapon, just a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a smirk on his face. You boys thirsty? He asked. The leader frowned. This doesn't concern you. On the contrary, Raynor said. It does. I've traded with this camp. Their names are written in my logbook. Taxed. Legal. You move on them, you move on my business. A silence. Tense. Barely held. Then Levi appeared behind a tree, with a bow drawn. Clara from the barn, with the revolver at her hip. Silas stood tall between them all. And the men from Hollow Bend realized they weren't just facing one man. They were facing a community. The leader scowled, but he wasn't a fool. He lowered the paper. We'll be back, he muttered. We'll be ready, Silas said. They turned and left, and the mountain exhaled. 3 days later, Clara carved a new sign and hung it over the rebuilt fence. Dust Creek Homestead, established by fire, kept by will. Levi stayed. Raynor passed through often, and Silas. He no longer walked like a man running from ghosts. He walked like a man building something that could outlast them. And Clara, she stood at the edge of the spring every evening, watching the mist rise and the stars return. She had come here to escape, but she had stayed to belong.